Hello, my name is John Teply, and I have the pleasure of speaking with Pete Chasar, and he's an amazing artist. I, I, I think that if he had his choice, he would live on the beach painting. Uh, um, and he does these marvelous paintings where you have a very strong sense of the place of its just the experience of space and what you can find there. He's an activist. He's been working with using art and other ways of talking about issues to people. And anyways, I will let him talk. Hi, Pete. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay now that we got the technical problem straightened out. And I'm afraid I have to correct you. I love going to the beach and being there, but I'm not a plein air painter.
Oh, you aren't?
No, I'm not. I work from photographs primarily, mostly photographs that I've taken myself. And I love to, I'm a hiker, I'm a preservationist. In fact, I went on a hike yesterday where I went to a local beach called China Beach, just sat there and watched the waves, took a couple of videos, took some photographs, and I work from those things. I work from my photographs, and that's how I produce my paintings. And sometimes I will paint almost exactly what's on the photograph, except I simplify. I really try to get by with as little detail as possible and still create the kind of reality that you mentioned about the sense of place.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I do when I take my photographs, I take photographs of places that move me in some way. It's either a spiritual way, some place that creates a sense of awe, and it's those kind of things. And one of the nice things about living where I do in Brookings, and for those who are not real familiar, Brookings is 330 miles from Portland. And it's like the really other end of the state. And I'm only 6 miles from California, living in Brookings. But we have between Brookings and Port Orford, and even further, but especially that first 50 miles, we have some of the best coastal scenery in the state, some of the very best. And that's what I enjoy painting. I also like painting in the redwoods. And, you know, Brookings is one of the few places in Oregon that has redwood trees.
Oh, good. That's kind of on the outer limit, isn't it?
It's at the very outer limit. They don't grow any further north than Brookings. And so that's kind of a special thing too. But of course, we're here to talk about Seventh Generation, and that's a coastal project. So
yes,
that's the essence of kind of what I do. And interestingly, I'm a hiker also. And so I like to paint some of the favorite places that I go to hike, my favorite beaches, my favorite places in the redwoods. I also lived in Arizona for 28 years. And so that was a real contrast, being in the desert. And I'm originally from New Jersey. So from going to New Jersey to Arizona and then the Oregon coast is just, and I love.
Those are all amazing places.
Exactly.
So, okay, so you find this place and you make a connection with it. A spiritual connection. That's the word you brought up. Could you tell me your process? So you just tell me your process of going from the decision to to document this place to the painting that you end up with. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I'm a hiker, and I have been a hiker for the last 30 years or so. And I love to photograph the places that I hike to and the places that create some kind of feeling of awe for me. And those are the kind of places that I like to then come back and do a painting of those places. And what's interesting is that, as I said, the piece that I have in the show is a piece right in the middle of Brookings, but Brookings is such a spectacular place because it's right on the coast and has a pretty rugged coastline. Um, it's just a neat place to be. We have, we have redwoods here, and we have beautiful beaches and spectacular beaches with cliffs, and it's that section from Brookings to Port Orford is one of the most spectacular anywhere. And so that's kind of my inspiration. And the place that's in the show uh, is, as I said, right in the middle of Brookings. It's nearby a sewer plant, and it's nearby a plywood plant that was the original reason why Brookings was developed. And yet it's this spectacular site because it's this little headland that juts out into the ocean. And looking down the coast is the painting that I have in the show. And it was just a spectacular day after a storm where there were really interesting clouds and the ocean was an interesting color. And I said, wow, this might make a good painting. So I snapped a couple of photographs, and sure enough, and that's what I used for the basis of the painting that's in the show.
So could you talk a little bit about your experience for painting? Because you have the photograph, so you have documentation of the place, but then painting it is a different experience. Could you talk about that experience?
Sure. Sometimes I do a fairly literal rendition of what I photographed, but other times I will kind of make a hybrid. Recently, I did one where I took 3 different photographs from 3 different days, periods, and I combined them into one painting of the same place.
Sure.
And it's kind of something you would never see in reality, and yet sometimes in some way it works.
Yeah.
It's just that I picked a sky from one photo, the ocean scene from another, and then the landscape itself or the rock forms from another photograph. And it works. So sometimes I will work directly from a photograph and do a pretty close rendition, although my style is to remove a lot of details. And I also paint very flat. If you look at my painting in the show, it's actually pretty flat. It creates the illusion of space, but I tend to just use like 3 values of the same color when I do, like, say it's a boulder. I'll just use three values to do that. And I try to keep it simple. And I try to paint in planes, in really, really simple planes versus doing a lot of modeling and gradual shading. I also, well, like I did with that one I just mentioned, I'll sometimes do a sky from, if I take photographs, I'll do a sky from one scene and the landscape from another, and maybe the foreground from another, and combine them. So it's kind of a hybrid kind of experience. But I do tend to work from photographs, but I don't take them literally. And I really try to boil it down to the essence of what's there. And I said, not use a lot of details, try to give the illusion of the details.
So it sounds, once you have the photograph, that you have the license to be playful.
Yes, exactly.
That you've got the main forms already there for you, and at that point, it's just it's a matter of how can I make it interesting,
Yes.
and
Well, well,
and one of the ways that you do that is by flattening things out, shapes, and not necessarily paying attention to detail.
you're right. I do not try to model the surface too much. I deal a lot in planes, and I will put, it's almost like a paint by numbers, but not really, because it's much more
Yeah.
refined than that. When I was a kid and I got paint by numbers sets, I got frustrated with them because I could paint much better than the paint by
Ah,
numbers.
true.
I'm going to throw this out. So I don't want to take the paint by numbers thing too literally.
So how important is the color of the photograph to the color of the painting that you end up with?
It depends. It's different in every case. And sometimes I'm very literal with what I paint. I will try to get almost the exact scene, but other times I will take license with it. As I mentioned, sometimes I'll use the sky from one photograph,
Yeah.
the middle ground from another, and the foreground from another to create a certain effect, or to get the effect that I want, instead of going with what the plain photographs are.
Now, are you going for an effect, or are you trying to paint an emotion or a transcendent experience? Because you use the word spiritual, and
Uh-huh.
and I actually think that most artists paint because of that, because there's this connection to whatever is out there and the mystery, and by painting, we feel that somehow we can connect ourselves or be part of it. Could you, I forgot my question because I was just talking
Well,
away there.
I'm trying to paint scenes that have an emotional impact on me. Something in this, where, I'm a hiker. And so when I go out and I hike the coast or I hike the redwoods and something strikes me, I will kind of photograph that. And the photographs can never really capture it completely.
No, they can't.
No, so what I try to do is then take my photograph, and sometimes that's why I combine.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
combine different ones.
Remind me, there's that old phrase, there's nothing like a photograph to make a mountain into a molehill. Yeah.
Yes.
So
Right.
that's where, as a painter, you may have experienced just something magnificent and awesome, and you get the photo of it, and it's not quite as magnificent, awesome as the moment was. And
No, it isn't. It tends to really flatten out, and that's one of the things. But when we're painting on a two-dimensional surface, that's pretty flat too. But you can do things to enhance it, and that's why sometimes I combine a couple or several different photographs to create a painting that it doesn't exist in reality, but it makes a better painting.
yeah, yeah. Now, you you've done activism. Could you talk about activism, art, just how those things can connect?
Well, one of the reasons I got started painting again was because I got involved here with a local growth boundary issue, and also because I needed some art for the walls of my house. I actually started as a sculptor more. When I was a kid, I was a painter. But then for a 35-year break, I was in the advertising business. And believe it or not, I wasn't an art director, I was a writer. But then when I retired 23 years ago, I got back into art big time, and I started with geometric sculptures, and I still make geometric sculptures too, a lot of them based on Buckminster Fuller's geometry.
Sure.
I think we all remember Buckminster Fuller. By the way, I met him once. It was quite a treat.
I bet it was.
Yes, it was. Was really small man. I'm like 6'1", 6'2", but these are really tiny men. Anyway, so I actually had a hiatus. I was in the advertising business for 35 years. But I was in the business as a writer. And I had suppressed all my art instincts. When I was a high school kid, nearing graduation, I went to the guidance counselor and she said to me, "What would you like to do after graduation?" And I said, "Go to art school." And I was in New Jersey at the time, and there were some great art schools, Pratt, Cooper Union, and all. She said, "Oh, don't go to art school. You look like you like to eat." I was a very impressionable kid. So I didn't go to art school. I went to college instead, and I got a degree in advertising. And so I went into advertising as a writer, but I had all this suppressed.
Well, you must have been very envious of all the beautiful paintings and illustrations that would come out, and you weren't part of that team.
Well, I had to, when I was working in advertising, I had to suppress my ability to draw because the art directors I worked with would get nervous when they could see I could draw and draw better than they could. But anyway, so to get back to the present, and I forgot where I went, where we were going with this.
Well, we were talking about your experience as an activist.
Right. I started back in Arizona. I helped to create the McDowell Sonoran Preserve in Scottsdale, which is now a 30,000 acre preserve. And 30,000 acres is like 5 times the size of Brookings, the town I live in. Anyway, back then I was a hiker. And when I came out here, I continued to hike on the coast, and that's what I still do, even though I'm at the age where I have to quit soon. But I go to these wonderful places and I take photographs of them, and then those are places that I like to paint. And that's one of the reasons why the coastal scene here and why we live here is a lot of the paintings in my portfolio are just this area of the Brookings, the Southern Oregon coast, which, as I said, the first 50 miles, I think, are the most spectacular.
That's excellent. Now, part of the project is creating a system of coastal watchers, and the title comes from the idea, of being in solidarity with future generations, and that equity transcends, just our time, but actually, we should be looking at, future generations. Could you talk a little bit about what about that appeals to you?
Well, I should mention that I am a member of a group called Coast Watch. I don't know if you're familiar with them. It's a preservation group that has mile adapters for the entire coast of Oregon. And for 20 years, I was the mile adapter for probably one of the most spectacular miles of the coast, from something called Whale's Head here to the Thomas Creek Bridge, which, as I said, has some of the most spectacular coastal scenery, and that's some of the stuff that I paint. I recently retired from Coast Watch because I'm getting up there in years, but that is part of my connection. In Arizona, I was a preservationist too when I lived in Arizona, and helped to create the 30,000 acre McDowell Sonoran Preserve. But here got into Coast Watch and painting, artistry, making sculptures.
Okay, good. Okay, well, I think we're winding down here.
That's it?
Yeah. But yeah.
Well, I'm glad we can finally make a connection. Believe me, I got really panicky when I couldn't get the system to work.
Now, is there something that you would like to talk about before we sign off here?
It's that I think that this coast is obviously some of the most spectacular coast in the country, especially the spot where I live. The first 50 miles from here to Port Orford, to me, is the best part of the coast. And that's one of the things I try to capture in my art, is the experience of being in this coastal area. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But you know, I'm a hiker, and so I paint some of the best places, or the places that I love the most, and I paint those scenes. Now, the one that is in the show, that is in a kind of an urban setting. It's surrounded by the town of Brookings, and yet it's so wild when you get out onto that Chetco Point, which is what that painting is that I have in the show.
Oh, good. Okay, well, for those that are viewing this, you can see Pete Chasar's painting. We will be at the Lincoln City Cultural Center from July 12th through the 16th. Pete, are you going to be able to make it?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I was just going to say, do you remember how many miles it is from?
Yeah, and that's
330 miles.
And it's slow driving up the coast too.
Yeah, well, there is a freeway, but yeah, it's slow driving up the coast.
Okay, well, thank you so much for talking with us, and we will talk soon. Bye for now.
I'm glad we made the connection. My pleasure.